Delighted you could join me back here in the Grand Torino. Jump in, hop on board. Let's get straight to this. We haven't got much time. I have with me the inevitable, the one and only Dr. E. Michael Jones. Dr. Jones, how are you, sir? Thank you for coming back.
Good, Rowan. Good to be here.
Thank you so much for giving me some of your time. Okay, before I get started, I want to just ask you, if you're new to the platform, please don't forget, press the like button, the subscription button, and the bell. You'll be reminded of future broadcasts here in the Grand Torino. As I stated before here, I'm gonna step aside with the usual formalities. I put a list of all of Dr. Jones's books where you can get them in the description box later on in the show. I encourage you to go jump and do your investigations on Dr. Jones. Mike, can I be so formal as to call you Mike, sir?
Sure.
Thank you, sir. Before I lead you into those first four questions that we just spoke about there as well, I want to take a passage from The People and the State by Jacques Martin. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But the opening line is, the state is not the supreme incarnation of the idea, as Hegel believed. The state is not a kind of collective Superman. The state is but an agency entitled to use power and coercion, and made up of experts or specialists in public order and welfare, an instrument in the service of man. Putting man at the service of that instrument is political perversion. The human person is an individual, is for the body politic, and the body politic is for the human person as a person. But man is by no means for the state. The state is for man. Really little thing you started me on my little journey there, sir. So with that brief introduction, I want to encourage my fans to go back to one of Dr. Jones's previous interviews with Freedom Radio, and some of the conversation pieces there they touched on. I want to ask Dr. Jones just to expand on them briefly. And they are as follows: how Jacques Martin, as who I just read from there, Dr. Jones, he was one of your main influences that got you started on your investigations.
Yes.
During the course of that interview, you mentioned the Catholic Chronicles and the teachings of Catholicism versus communism and socialism. And then can you explain to my Irish viewers and my American viewers, and they're completely well aware of it, about the term usury. And I gave the example to you earlier on about the loan that Lionel de Rothschild gave the Irish state, $8 million loan called the Irish Famine Loan. But the interest rate was 97%, which is usury. And last and finally, at your own pace and time, and I'll step out of the way gladly, Bishop Dermot Martin, during the abortion referendum, I was reading a quote there later on, and when encroached for the opinion of the church on the abortion referendum, he said that the days of the church telling its flock which way to vote are over, effectively announcing capitulation. Dr. Jones, take us away, please, sir.
Well, thank you. That's enough to talk about for a while. The interview you talked about was with a Frenchman, and I was talking about how the French were the vehicle of Logos in the early part of the 20th century because they brought the Thomistic revival from France to the United States in the 1930s. It's hard to imagine the intellectual vitality of the United States in the 1930s, but because we are so far from it right now. But at that time, a Jew by the name of Mortimer Adler and a Protestant by the name of Robert Hutchinson could actually invite two scholastic philosophers, Frenchmen, Jacques Maritain and Etienne Gilson, to give a talk at the University of Chicago to propose some type of alternative to the American philosophy of pragmatism that was created by John Dewey. Harvard did the same thing, invited Etienne Gilson there in the 1930s. It's impossible to think about this now. I mean, the way that debate has been crushed in the United States, the way it's being crushed right now on the internet. YouTube is censoring videos according to a completely irrational calculus. There's no other way to talk about it. What happened? Let me give you a short thumbnail sketch of what happened between then and now. Thomism had a chance. Human history is always going to be an option between Logos and anti-Logos. The forces of Logos were clearly represented by Maritain and Gilson, by Thomism, and there could have been a rebirth of Logos in the United States, and it was strangled in its cradle. That's a long story. I'm covering it in the book. The strangling took place at Notre Dame University, and I've already talked a lot about Notre Dame. I can talk in detail about that. but let's cut to the chase here. What happened? The WASPs and the Jews declared war on the Catholics. They were not going to debate. It's not going to be a debate, fellas. You won the debate, but we're going to win the war, because the war is all about social engineering. And so what happened during this period of time is that the Protestants and the Jews basically disconnected America from Logos. They did it in the realm of practical reason, in the realm of the moral law. Now, moral law is Logos. It's practical reason. This is rationality in its essence. That means it makes sense. Okay, if you use sexual liberation to disconnect a country from the moral law, which is what the Jews and the WASP did at this point, you will end up with irrational behavior. And that is precisely what happened here. We had a behavior getting out of control on various, all sorts of areas. The 1970s was basically the decade of behavior out of control. And the first manifestation of it was addictions. Alcoholics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Sexaholics Anonymous, all of these things because behavior had gotten out of control. And by the end of the decade, you have horror movies describing what happens when behavior gets out of control. Now, nobody can tolerate a society that is out of control. And so as a result, as soon as it gets out of control, somebody's going to step in and introduce a new program to prevent anarchy, to prevent the spread of anarchy. And that's precisely what happened over this period of time. And what we're seeing now is political correctness reaching its terminal phase in this campaign against hate speech on the internet. Hate speech, if I say to you the moral law, practical reason, you know what I'm talking about. I can give you the 10 Commandments. That's a summary of the natural law. Okay? If I ask you what hate speech is, nobody knows. Nobody knows. I'm sorry. And all you have to do is read the article that I've written for the July-August issue of Culture Wars, and you can see that. Facebook is operating according to some type of plan called hate speech. Hate speech is a creation of the Anti-Defamation League. Everybody knows this. It's a creation of this Jewish organization, and the main purpose of hate speech is to suppress any sort of speech that Jews don't like. Okay? It's that simple. Now, this is not a substitute for the moral law. In no way is this a substitute. When you have a criterion like this, you're going to create anger. And anger is going to lead to violence because this is arbitrary. These codes are arbitrary, they are unfair, and they are doomed to fail. Now, when they fail is anyone's guess, but in the meantime, between the ultimate failure and now, there's going to be increasing violence. And of course, there are people out there who rejoice at violence because it justifies their existence. The ADL is a classic example of what I'm talking about. Lenin, Trotsky, these are people who rejoiced in violence because it would lead to repression. Repression would lead to more violence, and that would lead to world revolution, which is what they wanted. They wanted to overturn all social order. That's what's going on right now. That's what we are trying to stop here because we believe, by the very fact of what we're doing, we believe in Logos, and the first principle of Logos is discourse. Reasoned people talking to each other and saying, this is what's really going on, and we are against it, and this is what we think should happen as the alternative. Okay, now, you talked about Ireland and debt. Okay, usury is a sin. Usury is irrational because of the nature of compound interest. There is no force on earth that can keep up with compound interest. After 70 years, a floating loan becomes basically completely unrepayable. Okay? This is exactly what happened in Europe at the time of the Fugger, and the Fuggers were the bankers, and the Habsburgs were the people that borrowed money from them. For the 40 years between the discovery of America and let's say 1555, that's about 60 years, the Fuggers owned every single gold and silver mine in the New World, and in 1555, I believe, they went bankrupt because not even every single gold and silver mine in the New World can keep up with compound interest. So, let's go to Ireland now. Ireland, there's one letter difference between Ireland and Iceland. Both Ireland and Iceland were in a similar situation, what was it, about 10 years ago. Okay, both countries are in financial trouble. Ireland has been loaded down with debt. It turns out that the Celtic Tiger was Irishmen borrowing money. Okay, borrowing money is always a bad idea. But if you're borrowing money to go on a vacation, that's a really bad idea. And this is a type of completely irrational behavior that swept through Ireland at a time, and then suddenly the bubble burst, and the Irish realized they had to pay back their debts. Okay? Now, in a situation like this, the government invariably steps in and represents the interest of the creditors. That's just governments do this all the time. They did it in the United States. They created a rebellion in the early years of the United States because this is precisely what Ireland did at this point. They represented the interests of the creditors. They bailed out the creditors, and they loaded down Ireland with unrepayable debt. And now we're seeing what should have happened in Ireland is what did happen in Iceland. The Icelanders, first of all, to just mention this fact, there's a lot of Irish DNA in Iceland. Okay, because those Vikings used to come down there and get those good-looking Irish women and drag them all back to Iceland. Okay, one of the main things that the Vikings did. Okay, so I don't, whatever worth that is, I don't know.
But use that in context, just a bit of humor. We're joking, obviously, but it's a fact of nature. Carry on, sir.
Anyway, so what does Iceland do? Iceland got involved with banking, internet banking. They were the cutting edge of internet banking, so it was like the Vikings coming back to life. They're going to loot your country with internet banking. Whatever it was, the British decided they didn't like it, and they basically froze the funds and caused a crisis, default crisis. Now, at this point, Iceland was told, you're just this little insignificant speck of dirt in the North Atlantic, and you better pay back your debts and get your politicians to support the creditors. And at this point, the Icelandic people, perhaps it's all that female DNA up there, I don't know, but female Irish DNA, the Icelanders decided, no, we're not going to do it. The guy who owns the bank lives down the street. If you want the money, ask him. But we are not going to pay back his debts. We are not going to go fishing for cod for the next 5,000 years to pay off this outrageous amount of debt. And so the Icelanders stiffed the bankers, and the bankers said, we'll never lend you money again, which was more like a promise, really. But it happened that the Icelanders got away with it, and the Irish didn't. And that's the unfortunate situation, because there's only one solution to a floating loan over a period of time, and that is default. You will never pay it back. So the question is it sooner or later? Now, to get to the last point, at this is the point where the Catholic Church should step in and say usury is a sin. And at that point, they should also say the great Catholic poet Dante put usurers and sodomites in the same circle in hell. And so we as the Catholic Church are here to warn you, don't approve usury, don't bail out the bankers, and don't pretend that homosexuals can get married. Neither one is, they're both preposterous, they're both demonic, and you should not follow that. Well, unfortunately, the Catholic Church didn't do it. Dermot Martin, a man I met in Rome when he was working for Cardinal Gagnon, apparently said that it's not the Church's role, and I humbly, I'm not a cardinal or a priest or anything, but I'm a Catholic, and I humbly disagree with Cardinal Martin. This is precisely what the Catholic Church is here to do. It's here to hold the state to the moral law. That's its main function in life, other than bringing the gospel of Jesus Christ to the people. The state is to the church is to the state what the soul is to the body. The soul is the source of reason, and the main source of reason in the body politic is practical reason or morality. So the Irish were completely unprepared, so they got the 1-2 punch now. First, it's the usurers, and secondly, it's the sodomites. Okay, and now you have a sodomite Indian who is the prime minister, and you are basically a conquered colony of the oligarchs. It's that simple.
Just jumping back in there, I think you charged straight through my whole list. I thought we could develop it a little bit further like that. And when we ascribe these words, which should not fear these words, we're just describing what people actually are. But the whole term, the concept that we are still borrowing now under the crazy math, we're bringing in a climate carbon tax now. Essentially, we're going to be paying for the borrowings of 50 billion to bring a further 1 million immigrants, because we can only ascribe them one way now because of the hate speech.
Right. So you will end up like Greece. In other words, every time that Greece reaches the point of default, the bankers come through with another loan, and that loan goes right through Greece. It doesn't stay there. It goes right through the banks of Greece, back into the coffers of the people who lent the loans, and the Greek people are poorer now than they were before. And over the course of this time, these countries will have to make concessions. So Ireland will have to, we'll take the Guinness Brewery, and we'll take the Blarney Stone, and we'll take, this is, whatever it is. It's like what happened.
Sorry, Dr. Jones. I would refuse to give up any state to any sell assets off to pay off debts. It's like the Chinese moving into Africa and buying up ports and taking up essential utilities to pay off loans. We should totally walk away from these. I agree. I'm telling you what's going to happen. I'm not telling you should give into it. I'm just saying this is what happens in places like Ecuador. Confessions of an Economic Hitman is a book by John Perkins, and he basically was there to do this. His job was to get countries like Ecuador into debt, which they could not repay. So the banks will get their money because there'll be more loans sloshing through the system. But in the meantime, we'll take your rainforest. Thank you. And that's what happened in Ecuador. We'll take the oil that you have underneath the rainforest. We will ruin the ecology of the rainforest. We will strip your country of its assets, and you will still be poor, and you will never pay off the debt. So I'm saying here that there is no economic solution to sovereign debt. It doesn't exist. The only way you have a solution to sovereign debt is if you print your own currency. And what you do then is you print up as much as you can, hand it to the debtor, and then just walk off. This was what Hjalmar Schacht did after Germany was conquered in World War I. There was a sovereign debt, a reparations payment. He says, okay, we'll pay it off. Crank up the printing presses, boys. And he created the hyperinflation of, I believe, 1924-25, in which this is the best way to eliminate sovereign debt. Ireland, unfortunately, because you're part of the European Union, you do not have your own printing press. Greece does not have its own printing press. They can't print up drachma now. And so as a result, you're stuck. You're stuck. And this is going to force a political resolution, and it may force a violent revolution. But what I'm trying to say here is the main hedge that the creditors have against violent revolution among the Irish, who do have this tradition, believe it or not, is sexual liberation. So convince the angry Irish to forget about their debts and go to the gay disco. Dance away your troubles, you Irishmen. Dance away your troubles at the gay disco. That's the solution, the new solution. The new solution is don't ask for a raise, go to the gay disco. That's the solution in Berlin, and the Irish are just going to be told to pay off your debts and go to the gay disco. I got to jump in there right now because we gotta say there is a movement, there is a stirring, there is an awakening, there is people that are not only I want them to wake up to their religion, but their responsibility as citizens. And if we see that the gay disco is out of control and that the Irish are following down a path, even if they're being misled, because as you say, the yoke of we were taught we were all ascribing to a sense of liberation, but this liberation turned into a form of control, and it's now
That's right.
totalitarian.
That's
We're just
right.
being told follow this line, indoctrinate your children into pedophilia activities, or explain to them about masturbation at 4 years of age, which is coming into our curriculum here now, which we're speaking about regularly. But to finish off, and I know you're pressed for time, the Catholic Chronicles teaching about against and intellectual Catholicism, because you described one of the leaders in Tanzania. He was a socialist genius, but he wasn't a Catholic intellect to understand his religion, and it would have prevented him from carrying out the mistakes of the socialism.
Right. That was Julius Nyerere. He had been educated at Edinburgh as a socialist. He went back. He had a free hand to create. He was the father of the country of Tanzania, and he had a free hand to create whatever he wanted. And he made the mistake of creating this Ujamaa socialism, which was a completely preposterous confection that was doomed to failure. A Polish priest once told me the only thing worse than socialism is African socialism. And Ujamaa socialism was African socialism, and the country of Tanzania has suffered ever since as a result of it. What I'd say here is what Julius should have read Quadragesimo Anno. He had a responsibility to know this because he was a Catholic and because he was the leader of that country. Because he did not, all of Tanzania suffered. And I'm saying now that there's going to be a reaction, and my prayer is that the Catholic Church will wake up and in some sense take charge of this reaction and lead it in some type of humane and nonviolent direction, because the reaction is coming. You can see it in England right now, where the Anglican Church has collapsed as a moral force. In England, it's being replaced by white guys on the one hand and Muslims on the other. You know, this is breeding violence. This is what I said at the very beginning of our interview, okay? If you use something like sexual liberation to destroy the moral order, you are destroying reason and reasoned discourse. And then you're going to have to put something in its place, because you cannot tolerate anarchy. And if you put some type of artificial political correctness in its place, hate speech, all these other type of things, you are asking for violence. You are begging for some type of violent reaction to what you're doing. So let's all take a deep breath and back off and work with the Catholic Church to bring about the restoration of Logos in these countries.
Couldn't agree more with you. That was quite very eloquently put and very passionately put as well. I know strong direction is what we need over here. And we need to start spreading the word of Logos, Logos is rising, and I know Logos is rising in my sphere that I communicate here, and I see you spreading the word through all your various interviews.
It's rising all over the world. So this is the moment. In every period of history, you're confronted with the forces of Logos and anti-Logos. History is full of tragedies where entire cultures choose anti-Logos over Logos. The Jews chose Barabbas over Jesus Christ. They chose violent revolution over the path of the Logos incarnate, and they got what they chose. Okay, be careful what you pray for, because the Jews got their violent revolution in 70 and it didn't turn out well at all. The temple was destroyed, and they tried it 60 years later and it was even worse. Everything was obliterated. Nobody knew where Jerusalem was after that point for decades, for centuries. So this is the choice in our age. We need to back away from this confrontation, the confrontation between violent revolution and this kind of oligarchic thought control that is brewing right now, and choose the path of Logos.
Well, I think the only way we can get around to having any sort of certainty is by getting away from the grips of Brussels. And I see Brexit's getting bigger, and I see the nationalist movement growing within the Brussels Parliament. Salvini doing sterling work, and more nations starting to develop their own borders, because without borders, a nation doesn't exist. I think I'd just like to wrap it up there. I want to do one big shout out that Mike, is to the big bear. As you can see, I'm wearing the shirt
Thank you.
to support the big bear. That's socialism always ends in starvation and genocide. Just so we remind us, so that I'll keep the big bears happy. And I'm trying to put a request out. If you do watch this interview, I would love to speak with you on Wolf's Big Bear. Dr. Jones, hopefully that's enough time there for you.
Thank you.
I want to thank you so much for your continued work and your continued putting yourself not only at personal risk to spread the word of Logos, because it is having a great effect. And a lot more younger men are tuning into that as well and looking for the moral compass and the family values that Owen gives. And you can see it in his day-to-day life and the critical thinking that you're bringing and spreading through your various interviews. I want to thank you very much for joining me and sharing your time with me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. God bless you.
God bless you too, sir. Us.